What's going on? This is Theo Gremminger, aka the OG Fantasy, back at it. Fantasy sleepers. It is week 9. This is wild times. The season is flying by. It's been a fun season. It's been wild. We've had a number of injuries. We've had a number of breakout performances, and we've got a whole second half of the season to look forward to. If you're a competitor and you're a player who loves fantasy football, you got to like this season. This is one that's kept you on your toes. This is one where lineup decisions have mattered. This is one where the waiver wire has mattered. And this video and also the column that I write at playerprofiler.com, this is sort of like a sneak preview for next week's waiver wire. A lot of times these guys are sitting there for you to pick up as a free agent in leagues that have open waivers, or if you're in a format which has a secondary waiver wire run like an FFPC or an NFFC. A lot of times these guys are available there. This week is a little bit tricky. We have multiple teams on bye. You're of course missing Detroit. You're missing San Francisco. It's tough. Those are a lot of guys who are locked in starters. So when you balance that out with the injured players, occasionally you're having to use a guy from this list as well. We don't want to throw darts. We want to be calculated in our decision-making process when it comes to using sleepers. But, a lot of times beggars cannot be choosers. You might have lost a guy like Kirk Cousins last week. You might be scrambling for a quarterback. You might be a running back needy team, and you have a guy like Christian McCaffrey and Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, all missing this week. You might have to dig deep to get some running back production. So last week we had a couple of hits on this video / article. Last week, Pierre Strong had a season high 82 yards. He had a really nice big catch and run. We're going to talk about him shortly. You had Royce Freeman finding the end zone. Again, the production was not great, but he was a guy that was added in a number of leagues, and hopefully you got him for free if you watch this video or if you read the sleepers column. And then, this is not going to happen all the time. And this was a guy where a lot of you are going to say, well, not in my league, bro. But Trey McBride was still available in like 80% of Yahoo leagues. He was a highly recommended player for me in my waiver wire column and also my sleepers column, also on the videos. And last week he goes insane. He finishes tight end 1 overall. So those are difficult to come by when we're looking at sleepers. And how do I identify guys for this video and for this article is I'm looking at Yahoo availability, and it's players who are available in 75% or more of leagues. Almost every player I talk about is going to be available in those situations. So we're really talking about kind of the bottom of the barrel, but a lot of these guys could be impactful to us this week and beyond. So go ahead, if you have some dead weight on your roster, go ahead and churn it and consider some of these players. First, we got to talk about the quarterback position. Now, again, this week is loaded. You don't have the luxury necessarily of having a Patrick Mahomes and a Tua Tagovailoa, in that big marquee matchup in Germany. Maybe you're looking towards guys that you've been churning. Maybe you're looking at some streamers. And the one that I talk about every single week who is really a locked-in high-end QB2 is Gardner Minshew. Minshew Magic is still available in 76% of Yahoo leagues. And in his last 4 starts, Minshew has finished quarterback 17, quarterback 3, and quarterback 18. So we saw the big spike week with the QB3 4-touchdown week, but his other weeks, he hasn't completely sunk you, especially in Superflex with a QB 17 and a QB 18 finish. Like last week, he gets two touchdown passes, and Michael Pittman is playing phenomenal. He has the double running back combination with Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss. Josh Downs, who is banged up this week, has been very good for Minshew, but Minshew is a high-end QB2, and in many leagues that comes in very handy. If you're in a deep format, Minshew should be rostered. He's a perfect QB2 for you that can get you through a bye week, and in Superflex, he's a must-start and a great trade target for you to go get in a lot of Superflex leagues. Mac Jones. Mac Jones has the nuts matchup. Like we talk about this every week on this Sleepers video. the Washington Commanders have been incredibly generous to opposing quarterbacks. They've conceded 300 or more passing yards in 6 out of their last 7 games. So I know a lot of you are thinking, Mac Jones, he just lost his, most productive wide receiver in Kendrick Bourne. But that kind of goes out the window. Washington has been incredibly generous, and Washington traded away their 2 top pass rushers this week. Chase Young and Montez Sweat are both gone from Washington. So that defense that's been soft against opposing quarterbacks will continue to be soft to opposing quarterbacks. So I'm looking at Mac Jones as a mid QB2 this week. And for a lot of you, that can get you through the week. Does he crack 300 passing yards? I mean, even the 2 games that Washington did not allow a 300 passing yard performance, Josh Dobbs goes for like 240 in game 1, and Tyrod Taylor goes for like 275. So they've just been shredded by opposing quarterbacks. So Mac Jones might be a guy who can get you through the week based on the. Another interesting streamer this week is Bryce Young. Last week, Bryce Young won the rookie showdown against CJ Stroud. It was a very ugly game in terms of total points scored. It was like a slugfest where Carolina wins a low-scoring game, a big weight off the shoulders of Carolina and Bryce Young. CJ Stroud has been by far the better player this season, but Bryce Young is really showing signs of life. He played mistake-free football, 235 yards passing and a touchdown. Did not throw an interception now for back-to-back weeks. You think back to Bryce Young earlier in the season, had a couple of poor interceptions. So his play is absolutely improving, and he has a chance to gain some fantasy momentum over his next 2. Plays Indianapolis, and he plays against Chicago. Indianapolis this week, Chicago next week. And these are bottom 5 defenses against opposing quarterbacks. So we talk about Minshew. One of the reasons Minshew is getting so many opportunities is because his defense is getting shredded. So Indianapolis is another team that we can kind of target with our quarterbacks. If you're a super flex manager, Bryce Young is locked in. I think he's got a chance to put up top 15 numbers this week in single quarterback as well. Taylor Heineke. Taylor Heineke gets his first start of the season this week against the Minnesota Vikings. The Falcons are kind of searching for an offensive spark, and Heineke is very willing to take shots downfield in terms of like his ADOT on his pass attempts and the completions for the Atlanta Falcons pass catchers. Like, I think Taylor Heineke is a guy who's more willing to take shots downfield than Desmond Ridder. Heineke last year had 4 starts where he was quarterback 15 or better for Washington. No Drake London this week, but expect a lot of targets to Jonnu Smith and Kyle Pitts. And, Bijan Robinson out of the backfield doesn't really hurt either for Heineke. So Heineke's a guy, it's more of a super flex recommendation, but I'm interested to see where this goes because when Drake London returns, there will be a number of talented players for him to work with. Pivoting over to the running back position, very difficult to find running back sleepers, but Devin Singletary is one. This guy's a little bit higher in our threshold than we like to recommend, but he's still available right now in 71% of Yahoo leagues. Dameon Pierce is banged up, and Singletary is going to kind of continue his ascent in the Houston backfield. Singletary's had his 2 highest snap shares of the entire season over the past 2 games, and this week he should see even more work. Now, the path to fantasy viability for Devin Singletary is him getting an uptick in targets, and he hasn't really been used like that. Like, he's been getting the targets over Dameon Pierce, but you're talking about like 2 targets here, 2 targets here. Now, Devin Singletary, I think if he's got the job to himself this week, I think that naturally Houston is going to self-scout and say, I want to get Singletary a little more involved as a pass catcher. So I think we could see 5 targets, and that's going to provide him a little bit more of a fantasy floor. For me, he's going to be comfortably an RB3 this week with Dameon Pierce not there, with upside to get into RB2 land. Royce Freeman. I want to change the narrative on Royce Freeman. Royce Freeman was a guy that was kind of like a high draft pick out of Oregon, never really worked out in Denver, kind of a bust, but he's having a little bit of a bounce back here with the Los Angeles Rams, making the most of his opportunity with Kyron Williams and Ronnie Rivers banged up. Royce Freeman played 57% of the snaps last week for the Rams. And he found the end zone, rushed for 44 yards. So over the past 2 games, Royce Freeman has 110 rushing yards and a touchdown. Now faces a Green Bay defense that's been beat up by running backs all year. Green Bay's allowed 7 RB2 or better weeks. And Matthew Stafford, I don't think he's going to play. I think it's going to be Rippin behind center for the Rams. And I expect a little bit more out of Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman. I think they lean on their running backs just slightly more to protect Rippin, with obviously a good amount of Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua as well. But Royce Freeman's a guy this week that if you're struggling at running back, Royce Freeman, I think, could find the end zone again. He's one that I like a lot, and he's available in 75% of Yahoo leagues. Keontae Ingram. Much like Dameon Pierce, I don't think Amari DiMercato is going to play this week. He's got a toe injury, and toe injuries are often very troublesome. You know, you hear about like the dreaded turf toe. We haven't heard that, but anytime I hear about a toe injury, it sounds minor, but a toe injury can kind of keep guys out longer than you'd expect. Keontae Ingram would be a desperation volume chase, dart throw type start. This is not a start that I'm really advocating, but he's available in 93% of Yahoo leagues. He would be the next man in. Tony Jones will also be available for Arizona, but I think Keontae Ingram would see, 12 to 15 touches if Amari DiMercato misses. Cleveland is a difficult defense to play against for opposing running backs, but you could see Keontae Ingram get you 10 points. And I think for some of you that are in a jam, that sounds pretty good versus some of the options out there. And then I got to talk about my guy, Pierre Strong. Pierre Strong is available in 94% of Yahoo leagues, coming off of a season-high 82-yard performance against this past week against Seattle. He has 19 touches over his past 2 games, and he's earning a role in the offense. Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt were banged up last week. I don't know how healthy they are. I think that they're probably getting healthier, but neither one is fully healthy. So you have the fact that Pierre Strong is the healthiest back. And if Kareem Hunt or Jerome Ford miss time, I think Strong would be a guy who could be like a RB3 or flex play in deep formats. So if you have a bench spot and you're looking for a potential lottery ticket, I think Pierre Strong could be it. And Jerome Ford has seen a ton of work as a receiver this season. Obviously, Kareem Hunt would take some of that over, but Pierre Strong has shown his ability as a receiver as well. So he's a guy that I like to have as a stash. You talk about having outs towards viability. Pierre Strong certainly has that. Wide receiver position, I randomly, not by design, all of my recommendations this week are rookies or second-year players. Demario Douglas is available still in 74% of Yahoo leagues, so a little bit higher than our 25% threshold, but he's basically it. I'm officially a Demario Douglas hype man. I write about him every week in the waiver wire column. I tweet about him, and I write about him here, and I talk about him on this video. He's going to see an increased role with Kendrick Bourne lost for the season. Douglas had 7 targets last week, and he also gets rushing attempts in every single game. He is probably the fastest and most dynamic receiver on New England. Not necessarily, but he's the one that's being utilized. He's got speed, he's explosiveness, he looks good with the ball in his hands. All the attributes that you want to see out of like a young slot receiver. He's small, but I think Douglas could get potentially 10 touches this week. I think, that's 7 targets. That's kind of like the floor moving forward. And the added rushing usage makes him, pretty attractive here if you're in a jam. I think he's a wide receiver 3 this week. I think he's going to put up top 36 numbers. And in a lot of deep formats, that's going to help you. If you're in a wide receiver heavy format, you need to prioritize and go get yourself some Demario Douglas. Jaden Reed. I talk about Jaden Reed all the time. Like, this is maybe Dynasty take lock a little bit that I'm constantly talking him up here for a redraft video. But Jaden Reed has a lot of things that we like about him. He had a season-high 83 receiving yards in Week 8. He's had 3 touchdown receptions on the season. It's really difficult to trust any Green Bay Packers right now when you start thinking about it. Like, you don't really want to start any of them. But involving Reed more is kind of a rational coaching decision for this offense that's really stuck in the mud. If he has the target total, like Reed's given you a 6 target game, a 7-target game, an 8-target game, if that starts to be like the weekly target volume that we can expect from him, then I think he can get some momentum in the second half of the season. Romeo Doubs has been bailed out by touchdown catches. Christian Watson is a guy that you're going to get in your starting lineup because of where you drafted him and, his potential ceiling. But he's been very disappointing as well. Luke Musgrave's been disappointing, and there's really not a lot to make of Aaron Jones right now. Seems to be very banged up. So Green Bay needs offensive skill position players to produce. I think in the second half of the season, you're going to be glad if you have Jaden Reed on your bench. I think his role is ascending. And a player that a lot of you might get annoyed hearing right now is Quentin Johnston. He makes this list for the first time this season. He is available in 81% of Yahoo leagues, only rostered in 19% of them, which is really crazy because he's a guy who was drafted in pretty much every league. Like, I bet if you looked at the week one percentage of how many rosters he was on in week one, you're talking about a guy who was probably 75% rostered. Now he's 19% rostered. And that's because he hasn't been producing at all. He's been one of the biggest disappointments among all rookie wide receivers. And it's been like such a great season for rookie wideouts. Puka Nacua, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell, Josh Downs, Jackson Smith and Jigba. All of them have had their moments. Michael Wilson has had his moments. Like, all these guys have had moments. Quentin Johnston has not. But last week he showed signs of life. 5 catches for 50 yards, which is not like a, oh my God, let's celebrate. But those numbers should increase this week because Josh Palmer is most likely to miss. He was the Chargers' first-round draft pick. And them getting something out of him this year, like, they might not say it, but they want to see something out of Quentin Johnston, or they're going to get panned for this pick. He faces a tough New York Jets defense, but I think that you're talking about a 20% target share for Quentin Johnston this week, especially if Palmer misses. Justin Herbert, there's a lot to like about there if you're in a real jam. And if he's available on your waiver wire, go ahead and pick him up if it doesn't cost you anything to get that free look this weekend. Now, if you're talking about dumpster diving at the position, if Josh Downs misses, Alec Pierce becomes interesting. Indianapolis just doesn't have the weapons besides Michael Pittman and the 2 running backs, where Alec Pierce, if he gets the secondary wide receiver role and he can assume the Josh Downs volume, he could be like a dart throw guy. If you recall, Alec Pierce had some strong moments as a rookie. This year, it really hasn't come into fruition. He's been the 3rd wide receiver behind Downs. But I think this week, if Downs misses, he could see an increased role. He's got 14 targets over his last 3 games. And Alec Pierce was like a combine, like, standout. Like, when it comes to size, speed combinations, Alec Pierce is definitely that. So if he's going to see a little bit more usage downfield, maybe Gardner Minshew, connects with him on a long one. Maybe he finds the end zone on a long touchdown. This is like your classic dart throw if you're in trouble this week with Alec Pierce. Jonathan Mingo. Mingo had a season-high 62 receiving yards in Carolina's win over Houston. Mingo's trending up. He could be the secondary target for Bryce Young over the second half of the season. Mingo was a high second-round draft pick for Carolina. Him having momentum in the second half of the fantasy season not only helps Bryce Young, but it helps the organization knowing that they've got a guy that they can start next season. It is absolutely the Adam Thielen show in Carolina, but having a guy who you can depend on every single week as a secondary wideout is actually very, very important for Bryce Young and also this offense. And Carolina was a team that was rumored at the trade deadline to go out and trade for a veteran wide receiver. They didn't do that. So that makes me think that they have a little bit more confidence in Mingo than maybe the fantasy community does. Tight end is very ugly this week. A lot of the guys that we want to use are rostered. And you also have a couple of injuries at the tight end position. And this week you have the bad fortune. If you are a Evan Engram manager, he's unavailable to you this week. Jacksonville's on a bye. If you're a George Kittle manager this week, he's unavailable to you on a bye. And then our guy Sam Laporta is unavailable this week on a bye. So a number of like locked in starting tight ends gone this week and not a whole lot available. So we're really dumpster diving here looking for fantasy sleepers. The first one I'll talk about is Donald Parham. We talked about Quentin Johnston with taking advantage of potential injuries in Los Angeles. You have, from the start of the season, Mike Williams and now Josh Palmer banged up for these Chargers at the wide receiver position. At the tight end position, you also have Gerald Everett dealing with a quad injury. So Donald Parham is a guy that if you're throwing darts, Donald Parham is right there for you. He has 4 touchdown catches on the season. Donald Parham is never going to be an every down player. They're going to mix in other tight ends because Parham's not the kind of guy that's going to be out on the field 80% of the time. But Parham is a guy who is a legitimate red zone threat for Justin Herbert. Again, he's connected with him on 4 touchdown passes this year. At the end of the season, Donald Parham could have like 8 touchdowns. And people are going to be like, wow, how did Donald Parham finish as tight end 18? Well, because he scored a bunch of touchdowns. So Donald Parham is a guy this week. It's a tough New York Jets defense, but they've been generous to opposing tight ends. They're a tough defense, but again, if there's a position we want to target against New York, it's the tight end position. So if you're in a jam, Donald Parham is available in 95% of Yahoo leagues. And then a guy who I started talking about, and I had beginning of the season, it was Tyler Conklin, which was my break glass in case of emergency tight end option. Now that guy is Cade Otton. It's very simple. Cade Otton is on the field all the time. Cade Otton has had 12 targets over his last 2 games. Do not expect any sort of a ceiling, but Cade Otton could give you 4 or 5 catches for 35, 40 yards. And for some of you, that's exactly what you need at the tight end position. Anyway, I am Theo Gremminger. This is the Fantasy Football Sleepers video. Check out all of my videos here at Player Profiler YouTube. You can find my articles at playerprofiler.com. Every single Monday, I write the 2-minute drill, which is my fantasy takeaways from the weekend. Every single Tuesday, the waiver wire column drops right here at Player Profiler. It's probably the deepest waiver wire column you're going to read available to you anywhere. I cover pretty much every option you can imagine for any sort of league. Very, very deep options, super flex options, you name it, a few dynasty options only. And then I drop the sleepers video on Thursdays or Fridays. You can find my podcast right here as well. And wherever podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts as well, you can subscribe to them or you can look at them here. They're available right here on Player Profiler YouTube. I recorded press coverage with Mike Shope and Adam Krautwurst this week of The Deep End. Dave Kluge of Football Guys joined Billy Muzio and I on First Class Fantasy. I dropped the first episode of Dynasty Life this week, my Dynasty podcast with Ryan McDowell of DLF. That was really, really good. Check that out. And then Matty Kiwoom and I are dropping Futurecast, which is a prospects. We're looking at guys that are going to be available to us next year. Looking at the top college prospects available, Futurecast. You can find that where podcasts are available and also right here on Player Profiler YouTube. Let's crush it this week. Stick with us here at Player Profiler. We want to see you win your leagues. We want to see you win some money. And let's get it. Great week of football. This is the best week in terms of marquee matchups. Miami, Kansas City, Philadelphia, Dallas, Buffalo, Cincinnati. Doesn't get better than this.